di iniziare con il talk del dottor Stallman. Abbiamo un paio di comunicati da fare, prima in italiano, poi in inglese. Allora, intanto io sono Lorenzo del POuL, siamo onorati di avere con noi il dottor Richard Stallman qui questa sera. Il dottor Stallman è il fondatore della Free Software Foundation, è fondatore e development leader del progetto gnu+linux. Quest'oggi, intanto ci devo ringraziare Fedimedia Italia per l'incredibile opportunità che ci hanno dato oggi per avere un'ospite così d'eccezione con noi. Prima di iniziare un paio di regole per questa serata. Come sapete già è obbligatorio mantenere la mascherina durante la durata del talk e per favore astenetevi dal bere e mangiare. Per quanto riguarda la questione di domande e risposte che faremo alla fine dell'intervento del dottor Stallman, vi sono stati consegnati dei foglietti. Potete scrivere le vostre domande su quei foglietti e noi li ritireremo. Durante la sessione di Q&A potrete comunque continuare a scrivere altre domande su altri foglietti che vi daremo e verranno consegnate al dottor Stallman. Good evening everyone. I'm Lorenzo from POuL. We are honored today to have Dr. Richard Stallman, founder of the Free Software Foundation and the founder and development leader of the GNU project. First of all, I want to appreciate the Fedimedia Italy that allowed us to have these exceptional hosts tonight. Just a couple of rules before we start. First of all, I kindly ask you to keep your face mask on at all times, and please do not drink or eat anything. Second of all, we give you some slip of paper that you can use to write your question for Dr. Stallman. During the Q&A session, we are going to give you more piece of paper, or you can read more questions if you have any more. Thank you.
Salve a tutti, sono Filippo Della Bianca, presidente di Fedimedia. Ho un breve comunicato di presentazione. Intanto grazie al Politecnico di Milano e al POuL per l'ospitalità e il sostegno per questa iniziativa. Oggi è un giorno importante per noi perché nasce Fedimedia Italia, un'associazione che si batte per un web decentralizzato, libero dalle logiche di sorveglianza e controllo del Big Tech. I nostri scopi sono promuovere il software libero, privacy come diritto fondamentale e delle comunità autogestite. Crediamo in un internet dove gli utenti sono proprietari dei propri dati, dove gli algoritmi non decidano cosa leggere e pensare, dove la tecnologia serve alle persone nel profitto. E nessuno meglio di Richard Stallman, della Free Software Movement, e abbiamo potuto inaugurare le nostre attività e la sua lotta per la libertà digitale è il faro che guida tutti i nostri progetti. Quindi insieme vedremo di scrivere un capitolo nuovo, quello di un web più etico, accessibile e umano. Grazie a tutti, grazie a Richard Stallman per essere qua. Thanks to the Politecnico Milan and POuL for their hospitality and support for this initiative. Today is a historic day for us. Fedimedia Italia is born. It's an association that fights for the centralized web, free from the surveillance and the control of big tech. Our goal to promote free software, privacy as a fundamental right, and self-managed communities. We believe in our internet where users own their data, where algorithms don't decide what to be read or think, and where technology serves people, not for profit. No one could have been a better figure to represent our activity than Richard Stallman, father of Free Software Association. His fight for digital freedom is the giving light of our project. We will write new, ethical, accessible, and human web. Thank you for everybody. Thank you for Richard Stallman to be here and to be part of this project. Thank you.
Hello. I'm going to start by showing a 14-minute video which explains, a 14-minute video that explains very efficiently the basic ideas of the free software movement. I made a lot of preparation for that video, and I said things in a very clear and also rapid fashion. So please, let's take it away. Well, it seems to be working. So now I will discuss some other topics that are important in the area of free software, although they weren't included in my time-limited presentation back then. One of them is the idea of copyleft. The easy way to make a program free software is to put a simple license on it saying, basically, you can do anything you like with this code. You can copy it, redistribute it, make modified versions, and so on. But although that does make the program free, it has a drawback. It permits too much. It permits people to convert the free code into non-free code. For instance, someone might have an idea to add a feature to an existing free program. And if the license permits everything whatsoever, then that person could take that code, add some features, and put a restrictive license on that code so that it's not free. So in effect, with those weak, lax licenses, people would be able to make non-free programs based on our code, and soon we would be competing against them all the time, and any improvements we made, they could use, but we can't use their improvements. Well, that puts freedom at a disadvantage. So I look for a way to prevent that, a way to make sure that people were free to make improvements, but their improvements would have to be free also. And that method is called copyleft, because it's based on copyright law. But copyright law is designed to serve a right-wing purpose, basically for some people to subjugate users and extract things from them. I wanted to serve a more leftist in spirit idea where we would all be free to cooperate. So I came up with this plan. A copyleft license says, you have the 4 freedoms, we grant you these 4 freedoms, but there's a condition. If you redistribute a program, including some of this code, then you must make the entire program free software in the same way. So if you start with our program and you add some new feature to it, and you want to release that, you must put this whole thing, including the improvement, under the same conditions. So we could then take that, including that improvement, and make another improvement and redistribute that. You would be cooperating with the society around you. So you can participate in the community, but you can't take advantage of it and exploit it without contributing. I implemented the idea of copyleft in a license for gnu+linux in 1985. And some years later, I figured out how to make one single license that could be dropped into any program and be its license. The way that works is that the source files of the program say this code can be used and redistributed under the terms of the GNU General Public License, version 1 it was at that point. And the exact same license text could be put into any program and would do the job. Before that, I had to make dozens of slightly different licenses because each one had to say which program it was for. This copy said, this is the GNU/Emacs General Public License. Oh, this is the GCC General Public License. They were the same except for the name of the program. So I figured out how to avoid stating the name of the program in the license, and that way it could be the exact same license text for whichever program was released under it. So it's possible to release free software with copyleft or without copyleft. Most of the time, the best thing to do is to use copyleft because that makes our community stronger. It creates more incentive for others to contribute improvements to existing copylefted free software. Companies often take an existing non-copylefted piece of free software and make the changes they want, which is okay so far, except that they make that changed version non-free. And that's not good. It's not helping society. With copyleft, you say to them, you can have this and use it, but you must share with us too. In recent decades, we've seen big companies that have a lot of influence on the community doing their best to convince people that copyleft is somehow not nice. You should be a nice guy and let us big companies take your code and do whatever we want with it. Well, I hope you will consider the question and decide that being a pushover like that, a doormat, is not what it means to really be a good member of society. It's better if you stand up to require people to treat other people right and cooperate with them instead of subjugating them. Now, I'd like to address the question of what conditions are necessary for you to have a valid reason to trust your computing. Under what circumstances is your computing worthy of being trusted? Well, first, let's suppose you're doing the computing on your own computer. Well, if the programs installed in the computer are free software, and you either installed them yourself or got them from people you trust, then this is the situation where you can trust what your computer is doing, because you are part of a group of people who use software, and the group controls what the software does. And that's a situation in which you could believe that the software is designed to treat you honestly and also to do what you like. And if you don't like it, you can change that aspect of it. And that's what we have been advocating for a few decades. But the existence of servers that might do computing for you makes the situation more complicated, because servers are different from software in how they interact with ethics. Under what circumstances can you trust a server to do your computing? If it is run by loyal friends of yours, so you can be really sure that they wouldn't do anything nasty to hurt you or snoop on you and betray you, then you could trust that, assuming that part of what you trust about them is that they're only installing free software, but they won't install non-free software that they can't control. Then you can be confident that they are maintaining control of the software in that server, that it will do the things it's supposed to do, that they'll tell you what it's supposed to do, and so you can reasonably confide some computing tasks of your own computing to that server. Of course, this is not the case for companies. You know, you can't, if a company says, oh, we'll do that computing for you, just give us all your data and let us do, you hope, what we said we were going to do, then trust us. Well, you'd be a fool to trust a company like that. Now, does it matter whether the software in that server is free? Well, it does somewhat. If whoever set up that server installed Microsoft Windows or Zoom, well, you know you can't trust the software made by those companies. So sure, it has to be free software. But remember, the copies of the free programs installed in that server will be their copies, not your copies. So you can't trust them to do what you want. They can trust those programs to do what they want. And if you can trust them, if they're your loyal friends, then there's enough basis for you to trust what that server does. But if they're not your loyal friends, the fact that they're putting in free software that they control, that doesn't give you a reason to trust it. It only gives them a reason to trust it. So it's not easy to make a server that you would have a reason to trust. And you might think, well, just allow you to, if they tell you which programs they install in it, and they're free programs, you can check those free programs. Well, yes and no. You can check the released versions of those programs, but you can't check the code that's installed and running on that server. That could be modified, right? It's free software. Any user can change it. Those people who set up the server can change it. Or they don't even have to change those programs. They can just put in a script that copies all your data and sends it to the NSA or whoever. That could be done without changing any of the installed software. And if you could check all the installed software yourself on their server, you wouldn't see it. So basically, it's hard to make servers that you could trust to do your own computing. But what do servers actually do? When you talk to a server, in many cases, it's just doing somebody else's computing, and you want to have some sort of dealings with that somebody. Like suppose you are thinking of buying something from an internet store. Well, what does it mean when you make a deal with a store? That's not your computing, not entirely. It's not the store's computing, not entirely. It's some of your computing and some of the store's computing done together in communication. You're negotiating a deal with the store. And if the conditions are such that you and the store both agree, then you make the deal. Well, what's fair and right in this situation is that your part of the computing should be under your control, and the store's part of the computing should be under the store's control. And that's what used to happen with websites, say, 15 years ago. You know, you would be running your browser, the store would be running its web server, and all the computing that happens in your machine you would control, and that's exactly the part of the computing that's yours. And the store's part of the computing it would control. So that was fair and just. But nowadays, you'll often find that the store's server sends JavaScript programs to your browser, programs to run in your computer, which you can't trust because you don't ever install them. They don't run because you installed them. They run because they were sent by the server. And you can never really trust that. You can even if they're free, they could be different each time you talk to that server. You could study it today. Suppose, it should give you access to the source code if it's free, to be free software. So, and that there is free software on websites. If you get that source code, you can study it and verify it's treating you honestly. But tomorrow it might be different, and how would you know? The idea of having software automatically sent to the user's machine by a server is basically untrustworthy. That's not the right way to do things. So, I've been talking about individuals and their computers, but these issues apply to organizations, companies, governments as well. Any kind of entity that's doing computing faces these issues. So governments certainly should not run non-free software or depend for their computing on non-free software or servers run by companies and so on. I proposed a system, a bureaucratic system, to transfer the state's computing to free software. It's not an easy plan to carry out. It would take years. Of course, changing what software the government runs will always take many years, but it's important to do for national security. So you might as well get moving on it. And you can find the plan in gnu.org/government. If governments are using non-free software, if they don't have control over the state's computing, this puts national digital sovereignty in danger. It allows whatever entity is the developer of some software that the state depends on to have power over the state. The people who are concerned in the US, people who are concerned with whether the Chinese government might have power over Americans through TikTok, well, they're right. It is dangerous. On the other hand, through something like Facebook, a US company could have power over the US. And it's the same danger. It doesn't matter which country the company in question is in. The danger is that it will have power over people, and it shouldn't have power over people. I would expect that this university tells students to run some non-free software. Am I right? Like, is it Microsoft Teams, for instance? Well, that is a totally untrustworthy program that you shouldn't allow onto your computer. Who knows what it might do? And not only that, does it demand Microsoft Windows? So you could screw yourself with Microsoft Teams on a free operating system. Well, it's a little better to do it on a free operating system than on Windows. But Microsoft Teams, being non-free, could do all sorts of mischief to you. It subjugates users. And any other non-free software that they tell you to use, like maybe Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office, they're non-free too. They can do nasty things, and basically users can't control what they do. And a lot of them have back doors. Now, what does malware mean? What does security? To imagine that security means that the company has full control over the software in your computer and full control over what it will do. I say that security means that you control that computing and that no company, nobody else, can get in to change it. So Microsoft Windows is totally insecure. It's vulnerable to an entity that you can't trust, namely Microsoft. So Microsoft's definition of security is nothing can possibly interfere with Microsoft control over all those computers. The users themselves can't interfere with Microsoft's control over their computers. I don't think that is security for the users. It's security for Microsoft. Security for the users would entail getting rid of Windows. But this distortion of the idea of security goes with proprietary software. And if you start looking at articles talking about security and security faults in software, you'll find that they are using this distorted definition of security. They're not talking about security for users. They're talking about security for the control of companies over users' computers. Now, most of the processors that are in computers users get today are designed to have backdoors also. Intel processors, since around 2010, have a backdoor called the management engine, which is part of the processors of modern, well, that go into computers. The processors that Intel makes contain a backdoor. Its name is the management engine, but what it does is it's effectively another processor that can't be turned off, at least not completely all the time. And it runs separately. It can talk on the internet separately even when the main processor is shut off. And as a result, it can be given commands to do nasty things, to take control of the computer, change almost anything. It has the ultimate control, and whatever software users have put into the user processor is secondary. But it's also secret. We don't know how to write programs for the management engine. And in addition, programs won't run in it unless it's signed by Intel. So we simply can't install our own software in that other processor. If we could, we might make it safe and useful. But they have made sure we can never do that unless somebody were to leak the signature key. So the existence of the management engine is insecurity in any Intel processor made in recent years. People found a way to turn off the management engine once the system has finished booting. But during that time, who knows what mischief it has carried out? You could describe it as an advanced persistent threat. Alas, AMD has done something similar. And this is in addition to the practice of sending JavaScript code to the user's computer to run there. And most browsers won't allow JavaScript to alter files, but they can do real harm anyway. They do very sophisticated kinds of surveillance. For instance, there is browser fingerprinting. Here's how it works. The JavaScript code sent by a website will contain a bunch of benchmark programs. And the idea is that each benchmark runs many times and it computes how long that takes. So it sends back a series of times. How long did this loop take to run 10,000 times? How long did this one, and this one? A whole bunch of numbers which together recognize that processor and will distinguish it from every other. They're all the same model of processor, but each one is slightly different. So when the benchmarks run on your computer, they'll send back a particular set of numbers that no other computer will send. So that website will always be able to recognize you when you return, because it will run the benchmarks again and it will get the same values. It will know that that's your computer even if you didn't log in. It will recognize it's the same computer it saw the other day. But the sites work together. So it can tell that the person on this server today is the same person with the same computer actually that it saw on that server the other week. If because the sites are communicating not through your browser, they're just talking to each other through the internet. And if any of them knows your name because perhaps you made an account on that one or subscribed to something or whatever, then they all know who you are. And everything that any site sees you doing is now attached to your name for some data broker. The easiest way to stop this is not to allow JavaScript code to run. at least not if it's sent by a website. Now, having browser add-ons released in JavaScript that are free, that are part of our community, users are checking them and making modifications, that can be like running any other free programs. The community has some control. We've got to make sure that the community has this control with such add-ons. Do understand, though, that if you have the choice of using some sort of service through a website with non-free JavaScript, or a choice of doing it through an app, the app is going to be worse because its surveillance and control are much broader than JavaScript. The JavaScript programs have to go through this strange convoluted method of browser fingerprinting because the direct method of finding out who you are, they're not allowed to do. The apps are allowed to do it. Now, people may wonder, you've probably noticed that the GNU General Public License has a facility for upgrading to new versions of the license. We recommend that people, when they release code under the GPL, that they put in their source files, this code can be redistributed and used under the terms of the GNU General Public License version 3 or any later version released by the Free Software Foundation. Currently, there is no later version. Version 3 is the current version. We came out with it in 2007, and that's the last version we've come out with. With luck, we'll never need to make a new version, but the world doesn't stand still. Problems are discovered in things that were previously considered to work, and new problems come to exist that didn't exist before. For instance, version 2 of the GPL seemed to be just fine in its conditions for redistributing binaries. It said if you redistribute binaries, you must do one of various things to make the source code available, because the binary shouldn't be distributed without giving people access to the source code that corresponds. And that seemed to be done right. And then along came BitTorrent. BitTorrent does a weird thing where when you try to download something, it also redistributes without your asking for it. That's just part of what made BitTorrent so efficient. Everybody downloading the torrent is also redistributing it at the same time. But the problem is, if the torrent was a binary of a program under GPL version 2, that person was also redistributing that binary, but not doing anything to make the source available. And not because of ill will or even carelessness. It's just that that user thinks, I'm just downloading. In fact, BitTorrent is redistributing as well. But BitTorrent didn't do the things that the GPL version 2 said have to be done. Well, there was nothing wrong with what those users were doing. It was just that GPL version 2 was written without knowledge of BitTorrent. That's because it was written in 1991, in 1991 when BitTorrent hadn't been thought of. So we needed to adjust the GPL to make it handle BitTorrent right. And that's one of the changes we made in GPL version 3. And we made a number of other changes to make things work better and deal with problems that had come into existence after 1991. And if people released their programs saying GPL version 2 or any later version, then they would be usable under GPL version 3, and users downloading binaries by BitTorrent would be acting entirely in accord with the GPL, since it would be they could do it under GPL version 3. This is why we need an upgrade path for licenses. If the upgrade path for licenses isn't there, problems develop and there's nothing that we can do about them. This kind of problem happens with Linux because a lot of Linux is released under GPL version 2 only. So if you're downloading a binary of Linux through BitTorrent, you're violating the GPL, and that means your permission to redistribute is void, and you have to ask all the copyright holders of all parts of Linux to forgive you. In GPL version 3, it's an easier situation. If you have inadvertently distributed in violation of the license, it's much easier to get forgiveness, because we'd seen this problem. But that only applies for a program that says GPL version 2 or later, because now every user has the option to use GPL 3 instead. Now, one of the harms done by software today and by computing systems today is tracking what people do. Some scholars in the 1970s published a paper pointing out that if a digital payment system were adopted and generally used by people, it would create a threat of tyranny, because the system would make it easy to track every person's activities, and it would be basically food for repression. Today, if you look at China, that's exactly what it is. People don't use cash much in China. A lot of things can't be done, and a lot of things demand that people show their ID, like taking the metro. You have to show your ID to get on the metro in Beijing. But buying almost anything identifies you too. And this is an example of why we need to reject digital payment systems as they are today. If they require identifying yourself, they're a danger to freedom in society as a whole. And we can help protect freedom by simply refusing to pay that way. Now, there are many other advantages of paying cash. For one thing, it's easier to recognize how much money you're spending. It helps poor people or people whose income is not quite enough to recognize that and spend less. Experiments show this. We should all encourage other people to pay cash and not identify themselves, to refuse to use all those other tempting non-anonymous digital tracking payment systems. So I recommend that you take some cash with you whenever you go out and pay with that. And if it's ever not enough, like you want to buy something more expensive and you didn't anticipate it, so you haven't got that much cash, well, go to an ATM and take money out. And then come back to the store and pay cash. Now, why is this better? Because it gives less data about you. With the ATM, the bank knows you took out money at a certain place. It doesn't know which store you purchased at, or what you bought, or how much you spent. If you take out enough money to cover the rest of the week, then you won't need to go to the ATM frequently. So you will be effectively resisting a method of tracking people. And this is not just important for your own freedom, it's important for society's freedom. Society as a whole can lose its freedom through government measures of repression. In the United States, we are watching this happen now. So, it's important for you and everyone around you to join in protecting freedom for your whole society. Now, websites all have privacy policies. If you study them carefully, you can find that they generally have loopholes. They say, well, we won't use your data for doing X, Y, or Z. They don't say that no other organization will ever be able to get that data about you and use it for X, Y, and Z. They're all written so that they look like they're protecting you, but they aren't effectively doing so. This is what convinced me not to give those organizations my data. That's another part of why I don't pay with anything but cash. Well, there are some exceptions. There are businesses that, like the electric company and the gas company, that I have accounts with. I want to have electricity and gas in my apartment. I want to have internet in my apartment. So I have to make contracts with those businesses. But if I go to a store and buy something, it's always with cash. If I buy a product, it's always with cash. And you can do the same thing. And this will greatly decrease the information that companies collect about you and then provide to data brokers. In Boston, if you take the metro, you can pay with a bank card and various other payment things that all have your name on them, and then they have a record saying where you entered the metro, which is a threat to freedom. So I always pay with cash. Now, people, due to the big power outage in Spain, a few weeks ago, which, by the way, I happened to be in, but it wouldn't matter. The point is, that shows how important it is for people to have and use cash. Another reason, this is making people around the world wake up that the idea of a cashless society leads to vulnerability. So join in protecting society from that vulnerability, and you will help protect it also from repression. I'm sure Italians will agree that no society is proof forever against repression. So let's organize to defend our society from the possibility of repression. We, however, in the GNU project, have a digital system of payment that protects users' anonymity. It's called gnu+linux. The idea is that the payer is anonymous, but the payee is not. The payer can get tokens from a bank, and it's more, I'm simplifying, but you use your bank account to do this, and you get these tokens which were signed by the authority, but it doesn't know which number it's signed. So if you then use these tokens, nobody can look at these tokens and see who got them. But you can look at them and see that they were signed. So you can show that your payment is valid, but then when you pay a store, in order to convert that token into money, the store has to identify itself. So Thaler cannot be used to hide wealth, which is a major problem for societies around the world, that rich people hide their money from taxation, and societies are unable to make rich people pay their share of keeping the world running. So this was explicitly a design goal for gnu+linux. It's not designed for moving millions of dollars around. Can't be used for that. There are normally limits on how many Thaler tokens you can get each month, but that's good for everyday life. And if you buy a house, well, for that you may have to identify yourself, but that's normal. If you want more information about gnu+linux, take a look at thaler.net. The systems, the stores that accept payment with Thaler, we call tolerable, and the others are intolerable. Thaler is operating now in Switzerland. Unfortunately, only for people who who are residing in Switzerland. So I can't use it myself. That makes me sad, but at least it's a step forward. So if you like the idea of free software, if you want it to spread, please support our movement. This is a movement. We are campaigning for a goal, freedom in the area of computing, that needs the people's support in order to achieve it. For instance, please join the Free Software Foundation. Go to fsf.org and become a member. We need that kind of help. You can also send donations. And by the way, ours is one of the few websites where you can make a donation or a purchase and not run any non-free JavaScript. This is our moral commitment, and we carried it out. However, I've got a few things here to sell. There's a bunch of merch, buttons and things, webcam covers, and so on, that you could buy from out there after we leave here. But I also have a book and a GNU to auction, and the money will go to the Free Software Foundation, and I can sign these if you wish, if you're the purchaser. But now it's time for questions.
Please pass it to the person that's most in the external part. We'll pass it there, and I'll pass there. So pass it here, there. Thank you.
met 20 years ago in New York.
I'm afraid I can't hear you. What did you say?
We met 20 years ago in New York. I still have the video of the interview. I will let you have. That's me.
Later, if you can sign
Okay.
your picture,
Should I dedicate them to anyone in particular, or should I just sign them?
Do you want me to read them or?
No, that wouldn't be any good at all. I wouldn't be able to understand you. I need to read them myself. That's the whole point. Would people please be silent? People, please be silent, because I'm going to start reading and answering the questions. Now, I get the questions in writing because I have hearing problems. If people, especially people whose first language is not English, state their questions vocally, it's hard for me to hear, and I have to keep asking, what did you say? Please speak slowly. And it takes a long time. It's rather frustrating. But when people write their questions, I can read them much more easily than that. That makes this efficient. I can answer a lot more questions this way in the time available than I could if people were speaking. Can a software that, even with every component free and reproducible builds, require a data center level power to be built, be considered free software, and be trusted? Well, I tend to think that that's not a sharp line. People's ability to amass computing power increases too. So I think that there is an issue there, but I don't think that there are programs that are simply non-free because some people can't build them. And of course, if some people can't build them, well, there always have been programs that some people couldn't build. But a lot of people can build them. Are you worried about large language models like ChatGPT being fed our data, being trained on it without our consent? I don't think that training those programs on our data makes any difference. Those programs cause problems, but a lot of those problems are the result of convincing people that they're intelligence, which they are not. And so that's why I refuse to refer to those programs as AI. Sometimes I call them artificial stupidity or bullshit generators. They play with text. They play with text and generate output that reads smoothly, but there's no reason to think it's true, because these programs don't understand truth or falsehood. They don't know the meaning of the text that they generate. They don't know the meaning of anything. They're simply not designed with the ability to do that. So we can be absolutely certain that what they generate is bullshit. As a philosophical point, bullshit means statements generated with indifference to the truth. Human beings who don't care about the truth can generate statements that are bullshit. And unfortunately, sometimes these people become president or whatever. But in the case of ChatGPT, we know that it's indifferent to the truth because it doesn't have the basic ability to know or understand anything. It can only try to make its usage coherent. So the issues of these programs are not mainly that they're trained with your data or my data. It's that people think that the output it generates indicates knowledge of something. how to stop surveillance by governments. The usual approach to this is by trying to regulate the use of data in databases. That's misguided because that's too late. What we have to stop is the collection of data to put into databases. And the way we have to achieve that is by regulating systems that can collect data about what data they're allowed to be able to collect. If we adopt laws regulating how data are used, then, well, there might be lots of data that are not allowed to be used for certain nasty things. But then when an authoritarian government comes into power, it'll change those laws and say, now we're going to use that data for all these vicious things. But if the data wasn't collected, that won't be possible. So that's one of many reasons why we have to regulate systems that are installed, so to limit what data they could possibly collect. We need to establish anonymous payment systems so that people can pay for anything anonymously. Very small. What happens if copyleft isn't respected? Well, it doesn't happen very often, but the copyright holders can sue. See, copyleft is based on copyright law. It takes copyright law and flips it over to become copyleft. And there are some lawsuits going on about this. There have been other cases that have been decided in favor of enforcement of copyleft. In fact, there's a very promising case which decided that it's not only the copyright holders that can enforce copyleft, it's the users who were denied the freedom they were entitled to. They can also go to court and enforce copyleft. They can say, I got this program and you made it from that which is under the GPL, and the GPL said you were supposed to give me the source code and you didn't. So give it to me now. And that will be a shot in the arm for copyleft enforcement. How can people, for example, the ones who aren't familiar with tech, defend themselves from crackers? Well, making sure software is secure in the legitimate sense is not easy. But at least it's a step above making it so-called secure in the sense that companies say, because at least you're not vulnerable to the company that developed the software, which nowadays people are. A lot of systems have been designed to snoop on people, including, for instance, in many countries, television broadcasts and cable television and distribution on the web. They're all tracking people. And this is data that crackers can get their hands on, and also the companies can simply give out when they want to. So we can improve, free software can improve it that way. And we also find bugs that wouldn't be found in secret software. But there's no, as far as I know, there's no guaranteed recipe for good security. Free software is awesome, but it means that somebody who's malicious can get the source code and find weaknesses. People find plenty of weaknesses in non-free software too. I think it's a mistake to claim that free software is any more vulnerable. Total privacy is awesome too, but if projects also, it protects also criminal activity. You don't want to live in a society where the state knows everything anybody does in case it might be criminal. What about AI? Well, the things that you're thinking about are not intelligence. There is real artificial intelligence. They're rather limited to specific domains, but there, for instance, are programs that can look at a photograph of a tissue sample and figure out whether it shows breast cancer and do a better job than human pathologists. Well, I'd say if something can do a job better than a human, it's better than a trained human, that's intelligent. And I think it's very good. I hope that that program gets into use and saves people's lives. But that doesn't, I think, represent a danger to society. The danger to society comes from the artificial stupidity. What do you think about development of the RISC-V architecture? Well, I have to point out that the RISC-V architecture is an instruction set. It's not a design for a piece of hardware or even for a processor chip. Now, it may be useful because I believe they checked that this instruction set is not patented. So it's safe to implement. If you want to develop a processor, maybe you should implement that instruction set. But that doesn't get you something that people can actually use. So I hope that such projects are done, but you can't think of it as just a matter of snapping your fingers from here on. What about entertainment software like video games? How could art be free? Lots of art is free. You just need some either artists or laws to make it free. Copyright lasts much too long. If the art in video games were copyrighted only for 10 years, we'd have a lot of free video game art already. And I wouldn't install on my computer any non-free video game because I won't have non-free software on my computer. And instead of playing the game, how about writing some software? Where can I get information on whether a particular piece of software or operating system is free? Well, for software, see if they offer its source code. If it's free, they should be offering users its source code. So you download the source code and you check to see if every file is in fact licensed under a free license. So which licenses are free? Look at gnu.org/licenses/licenselist.html. We list lots and lots of licenses and we say whether each one is free or not. Do you think it is possible that the, quote, AI, unquote, development evolves in a way where every step of the training is free? Well, I'm not sure what step of the training is free. Normally it's data, including code or text, that is free or not. And training is an activity. That the definition we have doesn't apply to an activity, but it does apply to the training data. And sure, it's possible there may be some situations where it's hard to get the necessary training data and make it free. But I think that we should insist that basically we can't consider a program, a machine learning program, morally legitimate if its training data isn't free and made available. Isn't there a way to build a trust system that is not free? I don't know what that means. But what by enforced privacy policies, I'm not sure what that means exactly, but in general, oh, he mentions GDPR. Well, the GDPR mostly focuses on regulating the use of data that has been collected. And it omits an important area completely. That is the area of all government activities that are described as security activities, which means that the worst possible misuses of your data are not even touched by the GDPR, the most dangerous ones. Oh, it's upside down. That's why I can't see it. It seems like much of the infrastructure of the big tech companies and their are made up of previous efforts of free code developers in a world where it feels like every code is potentially exploitable for profit. Do you feel computing as a whole can be saved? Well, profit as such is not evil. Making profit from the use of free software is allowed because there's no reason it shouldn't be. People need to make a living. I had a wonderful lunch in a restaurant that I'm sure makes a profit. I am very happy to have done so, and I plan to put it in my restaurant list so that other people will do it too. So no, I'm not against, and by the way, if they were using free software to do things like their accounting, I think that would be fine. I hope that they do. They shouldn't be the victims of non-free software. So free, remember, means libero, not gratis. So we shouldn't think that profit is in itself evil. Profit can be a temptation. It can, the desire for profit, if it is not joined by valuing freedom for others as well as yourself, can lead people to do wrong. How to build trust on the web. I'm not an expert on that. The ways people do that may be effective for the purposes where they're used. I look at questions such as, is a situation like this does it inherently have the possibility of being trustworthy? LLM and copyright, is it good that they ignore it? Well, it's not clear that they're ignoring it. You see, copyright never has covered the activity of studying text to analyze its patterns of usage. And that is a good thing, and it should not be changed. Making copyright more restrictive is generally harmful. Copyright is too restrictive already. And be prepared to distrust famous and well-paid artists. Most artists get very little money, but there are some exceptions who get a lot. And those are the ones who the publishing companies trot out to say, oh, they're stealing from us. Oh, those people who share with each other are stealing from us. We've got to put them in prison. They're pirates. That's what you should expect to hear when the big publishers want to restrict people more. How do you see the future of a free society? Do you have some advice on what hardware or software to use? Well, our advice about software you can find in directory.fsf.org for packages and gnu.org/distros for gnu+linux distributions. And there's also stuff in fsf.org/resources that you can look at. By the way, if people want to join in studying free programs and vetting them and listing them in directory.fsf.org, you can volunteer for that. We need more people to help do that job. We have something like 15,000 or so programs listed, but there are thousands more free programs that we need to study so that we can list them. How does the GPL handle, quote, well, it's large language models, quote, regurgitation, quote, of free software? Well, I don't know what that's actually like in practice, but I can say that if the output of the LLM is substantially similar to some existing piece of software that was examined by it, then that is copyright infringement. There is no legal difference between a copy that came through an LLM and a copy that was made by cutting and pasting. What is your opinion of open source projects promoted by big tech, such as Microsoft's .NET Core? Well, first of all, I don't actually advocate open source, because open source is a depoliticized would-be substitute for the concept of free software. I advocate free software because I advocate freedom. And I don't use the term, quote, open source, unquote, because it is not associated with valuing freedom. But what about programs that are released under free licenses and were developed by big tech companies? Their contributions to society, there's nothing bad about that. What's bad that they do is when they run software or when they release software that's non-free or create online disservices that mistreat their users. That's bad. Emacs is my daily driver, and I feel really empowered and free. Oh, this person is thanking me. Well, you're very welcome. As a free software developer, it is easy to attach a free and copyleft license to my code. Enforcing it is another story. What are the tools at our disposal? Well, there are organizations such as the Free Software Foundation and the Software Freedom Conservancy that look for battles to fight. So you can talk with them. It's true that it may not be easy. I wish it were easier, but that doesn't justify any non-free software. How can I ask my teachers to not require me to use proprietary software? The first thing is, don't think about asking them. Don't think about saying, "Oh, teacher, may I please have some freedom?" The first thing to say is, this software is an injustice. And the next thing is, you're doing wrong to us by trying to make us use it. And then get together and plan campaigns for how to pressure schools to let students have alternatives, to allow the people who don't want to run non-free software to do the classwork in some other way. Is the fact that some developers use non-GPL licenses or proprietary libraries I can't read the rest. But in any case, using software that is free but not copyleft is okay. When it's useful, use it. I urge you, when you write useful software, to copyleft it. But the non-copylefted free programs that exist are important and useful, and there's no reason to refuse to use them. And contributing improvements to them is also a fine thing to do. You know, sometimes it would be absurd to try to copyleft an improvement to some large existing non-copylefted free program. The cooperating thing to do is contribute your improvements to the developers of the overall program. But what we want to avoid doing is releasing large amounts of code under non-copyleft licenses. We want to, when we have considerable leverage, that's the time we should make sure we use it to defend freedom. Now, as for proprietary libraries, you shouldn't use those. And free programs that depend on proprietary libraries are basically useless in the free world, but you might be able to modify one of them to work with some substitute for that proprietary library, and that would be an important contribution to the community, because you would free up the use of that library. Considering that, quote AI, unquote, requires high hardware installations as GPUs and cooling, which are expensive, I don't understand this, but I've heard that the Chinese software, DeepSeek, has much less hardware requirements. And when people figure out how to do that, or when others figure out how to do that, that might solve some of this problem. That's not my field, actually. Complexity. Is simplicity a requirement for freedom? No. GCC is pretty complicated. gnu+linux is pretty complicated. Nonetheless, people do understand them and change them, and they are an important part of our freedom. Linux, the kernel, is also complicated, but people do understand it and change it. What about the elephant in the room, cell phones? Well, they are Orwellian snooping devices, and that's why I refuse to have one. You can't do anything about the fact that the cellular network tracks the movement of phones. In principle, you could design the phones such that the software in them can't be changed remotely, but since that involves building hardware, and it might be very difficult. What about Android and iPhone? Well, Android contains a fair amount of free software, and also parts that are non-free, such as Google Play and the Google Play Services library. It is possible to strip out most of the non-free software and have a system that works. It won't run ordinary Android apps, which is good because those are non-free anyway. But there are apps that can be obtained from fdroid.org, apps that are free. Now, they won't do the same thing. The free apps generally do something general, like the application programs we used to install and still do install on our gnu+linux computers. But the thousands of apps made by organizations for talking to them, those are basically all non-free. And so you got to refuse to use them. Nowadays, those who master technology rule the world. Well, that's true in a sense, but it depends what you mean by master. The companies that control the technology sort of rule the world. At least they rule parts of it. Free and non-free software is being used by powerful people and companies to fuel their egoistic interests. Yeah, but the free software by itself isn't bad. They're always using some non-free software which gives them power over the users. Without that, they wouldn't be able to subjugate people the same way. What do you think about the ongoing EU proposal to have companies save metadata in plain text of everything EU citizens do? Is there anything we can do about it? I don't know about that. It sounds rather dangerous, but that depends on details, unfortunately. What I suppose, you've got to see if there's some public interest organization which is already studying this and has lawyers looking at the dangers and what kind of changes can be proposed. Does non-gratis preclude Libre? Well, you could certainly sell copies of free software. Anyone can take a free program and sell copies of it, although if the license is, if it's a strong enough license like the GPL, you'll have to distribute the copies you sell following the rules of the license, respecting users' freedom. Is free software must be gratis? It doesn't have to be gratis, but it's true that with free software, you can't use the usual traditional strategy of software product businesses. But there are software products that are free and whose companies make money in other ways. And there are software development companies that develop software for users that pay for it to be developed. And those businesses, well, they had better deliver their work to the client as free software, otherwise they're cheating the client. But there's no difficulty for these companies to make money. I think most of the paid software development in the world is developing software for a specific client. You talk about backdoors in processors like Intel. So is the use of OS like Tails not really safe as they say? I don't actually know anything about Tails. I'm not sure if I've heard about it, but I don't know much about it. I don't know whether it's free software. But if the question is, what if it's running on a recent Intel processor with the management engine? Is that an effective backdoor? Unfortunately, I can't tell. I don't know if anybody knows this. Maybe you'd have to talk to the right people in Intel and they wouldn't tell you. After so many years, do you still believe LLVM is a setback for the GNU community? Yes, to some extent. It makes possible, that's a compiler, basically, that was intended to replace GCC, and in some ways is cleaner. But sad to say, they released it in a non-copylefted way. And so it is a contribution, but the choice of license makes it weak. It can be used to make non-free compilers. GCC, by being the obvious way to make a compiler and being copylefted, compelled some companies to make free compilers that worked for their machines. So that saved us a certain kind of problem. I recently learned of a new GNU package, GNU boot, fork from Libre boot to remove the ability to update the CPU microcode. On learning about this, I thought to myself that it's the microcode that comes with the CPU only in the first place. Okay, in the first place. Well, it's an edge case. You can't run a computer without a CPU. They all have microcode generally, and we can't make the companies that design the CPUs release sources for microcode or release tools so we could compile modified sources or anything. We don't know what that microcode does. So thinking about this, my conclusion was the only way we could make that microcode not be a violation of our security is if nobody can change it. We can't aim for the solution where we can all change it. In theory, that's possible, but in practice, we have no way to get there. So the one thing we can do to arrange, to avoid the injustice of it is to make sure nobody else can change it either. So for instance, nobody can change the microcode in this computer because I won't ever install changed microcode, and nobody else, not even Intel, can talk to it to install different microcode in it. I won't allow that to happen. What gnu+boot is doing is making sure of that. Basically, if somebody wants to install changed microcode in my computer, I'm going to say no, and the point of gnu+boot is to say no for me. So it's a situation where the good solution is out of reach. The solution we'd really want is that the source code for the microcode should be available, and we should be able to compile it and install it if we want to, and not if we don't want to. Here are some more. I may not be able to get through all of these. There are a lot of questions this time, but I'll do my best. These are all the questions I got through. There are programs that are undoubtedly convenient that require a grade of computation to solve this issue. The computation is usually delegated to services that the user didn't have access to legally. Do you think we should move away from decentralized computing for these extensive calculations? It depends who's controlling the computing. If there's a community of people who are working together for a project to serve the public, I think that's good. If some company owned by billionaires is using lots of servers to do a giant job so it will be able to have more power over us, I think that's bad. The question is, when they come up with software that does a certain job, are they going to release it as free software, or are they going to use it to control us? Isn't innovativeness limited by restricting for-profit development? It could be, but innovation is rated too highly in our society, is given too much importance. Maintaining our society's freedom is more important. Innovation can be good or bad. Innovation could be convenient for us, or painful for us, or oppressive to us. So who gets to decide whether an innovation gets used? Well, in this world, it's not the users who decide whether they're going to use the innovation. It's usually a company that decides whether to ram it down users' throats. Consider Google and its, quote, AI, unquote, search that gives people often erroneous summaries of a website instead of pointing people at the website so they can look for themselves. That's an innovation. Users don't like it, but Google decides whether to do it to them. So if we were in control of whether to use an innovation, then innovation would be somewhat better for us. But when we're not in control, it's bad for us. So when people say, give up some freedom to have more innovation, I am not impressed. There are people who work very hard on free software, but their work is not acknowledged and sustained financed appropriately, resulted. I'm not sure what the rest of the words say. If there's a way I can have more light, but I think I get the point. I wish people supported free software developers more, but there's nothing I can directly do about it. The FSF doesn't get enough donations to do this. I think it would be good for governments to do more to support the developers of useful free software. Ah, thanks. Oh boy, this is so tiny. What do you think about POuL? I'm not sure what it is. What? Oh, let's see if this helps. Can someone tell me what POuL is? Speak louder, please. From what? Oh, right. He's talking about making software that isn't really free, but is somewhat vaguely similar to free. And I don't think it will actually respect users' freedom adequately, so I wouldn't use any software released that way. When you I'm afraid this doesn't help. Regarding closed, centralized, quote, AI, unquote, companies, how can the community compete with them? Well, it's not clear that we should. What we need to do is more reject them than compete with them. What you are describing feels like a trustless society, but I think we can all agree society would be impossible without trust. I agree that unfortunately the existing situation is that most people are compelled to trust companies which certainly don't deserve our trust. And the question of how to change this, it's not a matter of whether trust is desirable, it's a matter of how we can bring about the development of more organizations that we can trust. And I don't think that has a simple, uniform answer. At least I don't know what it is. Couldn't softwares like Linux include malicious intents coming from other users? Certainly. In principle, a free program can have a malicious functionality, just as a non-free program can. But when it's free software, the users have a chance to work together to get rid of it. Whereas in a non-free program, if it serves the purposes of the company that releases the program, there's nothing users can do except not use that program. Many traditional left movements or quote global south, a term I don't accept, could argue force stops them from developing through patents. This has nothing to do with development of a good society. This is based on an idea of development, that development works by making some people rich. But that doesn't develop a society where people have freedom. And if you think that having more products made that some people can pay for, I don't think that, you know, if there were no other issue except what people can afford, that might be a valid argument. But when these products are likely to work by denying people freedom, then they're not good anymore. What's your thoughts on hardware tools being a geopolitical weapon to use against China, and how Western floss community can protect something hardware so it doesn't depend solely on China's investment? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm no expert on that. I'm sure you could find policies that governments could adopt to insist that hardware designs be published and that they be available to build in other countries and studied so that it's possible to find malicious functionality in them. But this is not the way that governments are actually leaning. How big is the degree of black boxes AI LLMs, quote unquote, make GPL obsolete by redirecting code to computers without giving the source? Well, as I pointed out, actual copying in a sufficient degree to affect copyright law is not legalized by LLMs. So I think that there's some exaggeration in this, but it's true that companies do sometimes get away with violating the GPL, and it might be somewhat easier if they have LLMs to help. But I think it's a mistake to overestimate how often LLM output would infringe copyright. Vague similarities that come from codes being written by someone or something that looked at a lot of code doesn't mean it's all copyright infringing. How is Libre a commercially viable choice for someone who wants to make software? I think this takes a very simplistic idea of how software is made. People are developing lots of free software. So arguments trying to say that it couldn't happen are obviously mistaken. And that's all that we really need to say about it. Especially if enough of us, and the more of us know why we should reject the non-free programs, the less commercially viable they will be. How could companies earn money? Same thing. If a company is successful by developing non-free software, I won't use it. And I hope you won't use it either, because they're not contributing to a society where people can use computers in freedom. So let's get together, let's not try to worry about how they could make money. Let's worry about how we can make sure they don't make money. What do you think about all the Europe's attempts at protecting its citizens' right to privacy via laws? As I said, I don't think they're very effective because they haven't been designed to really do the job. They're too weak. They're mostly aimed at, quote, data protection, unquote, meaning assuming that databases will be filled in, trying to limit how the databases are used. And I think that that is intervening at the wrong place. What's needed is to prohibit the installation of systems that collect data and thus ensure that those databases are not collected. One very simple practical question is, what do we think about a system to run a parking lot that identifies every car or every driver that parks? Should that be allowed? I say it should be prohibited. They should not be allowed to identify everyone who parks. No matter what argument they have to make that something will be more convenient or more efficient if they do, because freedom is important. And we shouldn't allow companies or cities to throw it away just to make things more efficient. Now, I've seen parking lots like that in France. I don't know if they have them in Italy, but it's dangerous wherever.
We have about 10 minutes.
Oh well, it looks like we don't have much more time. But I'll answer a few more questions anyway. If all you have is the binary, how would you know if the GPL terms have been violated? Well, if you know it's a binary of a GPL-covered program, then the terms have been violated. Distributing the binaries without source code or redistributing the binaries without the information about where to get the source code is violation. Now, how would you know if it was a GPL-covered program in the first place? There's no obvious, simple way. You can't just look at the binaries code and see if it was from something GPL-covered. But in practice, you may have ways to find out, like what job does it do? Can you determine what source code what program this came from? And often you can tell what program it's a modified version of, and if that's a GPL covered program, then presumably it is a violation of the GPL. The next question is someone who's authorized to sue interested in suing? But that's a thing that can be affected by mobilization of the citizens. If there's a user community of people who want to demand that they get the source of this version and are willing to work together to mount a lawsuit, it can be done. If you have discovered tomorrow that 85% of GNU code has been written by an LLM trained on proprietary code without consent, well, that doesn't necessarily matter at all. What matters is whether there is substantial similarity between the output and the input. That's what copyright law says. So, and there's no reason to assume that the output of an LLM is going to have substantial similarity to any of the input that it learned to come up with under faking understanding of programming from. If there were specific pieces of similarity, that's different. That's not an automatic consequence of what the input was. So I don't think that the idea of contaminated is pertinent here. We all learn to write code by reading lots of programs. And what we learn from that is patterns of how to do certain simple things in code. And then we put lots of instances of those together in the right way to solve a particular problem. And none of that's covered by copyright. It's the same way we learn a language, a human language. We hear lots of sentences using language in particular ways, and from that we come up with our ideas of good usage. But none of that is covered by copyright law. There has to be more detail in it to make something big enough to matter for copyright law. I think that there's a tremendous amount of public misunderstanding of this point. So I'm afraid I have to, it's time that I've got to stop. So I will be going out in a few minutes for the auctions and the sales. And I hope you'll come with me. And please join the Free Software Foundation. You can do it at fsf.org. We need your support. Would somebody like to help me with this? Okay, so it would be useful for a couple of people to come and help with the sales of the small merchandise. I'll tell you the prices.